So today I'll be talking to you about some research that I completed for my master's. Right now, I'm a PhD student at the Sonic Arts Research Center, part of Queen's University Belfast. So initially, this paper talks about the combination of sonic arts with cultural storytelling about peace walls, primarily the peace wall between the Falls and Shankill Road in West Belfast. I initially became interested in this topic back in 2016 when I visited Northern Ireland for another conference. And it visually struck me when I briefly passed by the Peace Wall, thinking about what exactly was on the other side, how does this affect the community, and this is where I began engaging with my own artistic projects for cultural storytelling. So a little bit about the Peace Wall itself and the Troubles. I'll just talk very quickly about it since there's a lot of history prior to the 1969. But basically, Northern Ireland has a long-standing history of division between political ideologies and different community groups. On one hand, we have Republican nationalists who want to remain with a united Ireland and Unionist loyalists who want to remain with the United Kingdom. However, as we were approaching 1969, this slowly moved into a civil rights movement where riots, violence, and death began to occur. The Northern Ireland government and British Army decided to put up temporary measures called the Peace Walls because both communities were putting man-made barriers in between each other to have a sense of protection and safety from one another. As I stated, the army said this was a temporary measure. However, in 2020, these walls still remain, even though the conflict ended in 1998. So they've lasted longer than the Berlin Wall. Back in 2015, the Belfast Interface Project recorded around 116 different forms of defensive architectures around Northern Ireland, and approximately 90 of those are just in Belfast. Now, a defensive architecture is not only a peace wall, it could be any sort of barrier or fencing or divider between these communities. Now, the peace wall that's between the Falls and Shankill Road has around 4 different gates. One that's on Lanark Way. This one is controlled by the police, so they could open and close it from their station. However, the other gates that are in between are closed and opened by community members or local residents. And these close at 7 o'clock at night and reopen at 7 o'clock in the morning. However, Sundays, these gates remain closed. So when I was approaching this idea of a peace wall that is visually striking, I was thinking about sound. How does sound travel around, through, underneath, or can connect these two communities, because visually we see a divide. So I basically asked, how can audio augment perspectives in its most basic form? And I was looking at ways of accessibility and engagement, as well as how do you record sound for space and identity. And I used a combination of different disciplines such as socially engaged arts, urban arts, sonification, which is data that is translated into sound, and as well as the concept of sonic arts. So how to embody all of this into a research project. Now, I use 2 concepts, spatial audio and Soundwalks. Spatial audio is the immersive listening experience, so basically 3D or 360 listening. And this is to create virtual auditory environments. So we could basically think of this as sonic spheres or sound bubbles. And I used a type of technology called ambisonics. Now, this technology is coming back into play within the field. And the great thing about it is the flexibility, not only from recording, but exporting, decoding, or rendering these files. So you can take a ambisonic file that imprints the 360 information, and then you can change it for stereo playback, binaural rendering, which allows for 360 listening through headphones, or higher speaker placements such as 5.1, 7.1, or anything higher, depending on the order of ambisonics. Now, this allows for a presence and location, recording these different bubbles around the wall. And it will give you the presence of you are there and they are there through binaural and ambisonic recordings. The concept of Soundwalks comes from Murray Schafer and his World Soundscape project, which basically describes Soundwalk as discovering or rediscovering sonic elements in one's daily life. Now, throughout the years, Soundwalks have changed and been appropriated to different projects, whether this is implemented with technology or through guidance or instructions. But the basic concept is to actively listen to one space, because sound is one of the key things for us humans to localize with a space. It's something we can't turn off, but we could actively or passively listen to these spaces. Approaching this research project, I also had some participants who I interviewed to create the narrative within the projects. I was also granted permission from BBC Northern Ireland to go through their archives and check any audiovisual material that they may have based on the troubles. However, with these types of recordings and participants, there are a lot of copyright issues, permissions, and limitations creatively, or where I can actually use them within my pieces. So I used the BBC Northern Ireland archive to engage in my piece Divided Spaces as the past discussion. What were the things happening back in the early 70s and up till early 2000s? I spoke about sonification before, and originally I wanted to do was take images of the Peace Wall on either side and render their RGB data and translate that into sound. However, if those who know the Peace Wall, there's only one side that has the murals and the other is just bare. So I want to find a more equal opportunity of representing this. So I use physical interaction sonification, which I used a contact microphone that records vibrations. And as well, I used a coil microphone that records electronic signals. So these are signals around the wall that could be from generators or any other electrical sources. As I moved forward into these projects, I realized that what I was doing with ambisonics was quite unorthodox. Usually you just take an ambisonics file and represent that sonic sphere. However, I decided, because I wanted to implement this idea, well, what if one day the walls were removed? How would these spaces be connected? And since we can't physically do it by removing the wall today, I was able to do it with sound. So I audio stitched the sonic spheres and created a new form or a new bubble of sound that connects these spaces. So when I demonstrated it at the Sonic Lab at the Sonic Arts Research Center, by definition, that room is an immersive listening experience because of speakers located above you, around you, and underneath you. You're basically on a floating grid floor. And listeners that are within the space are technically acting as part of the wall and listening to both sides. And I used the participants and some of the discussions from BBC Northern Ireland to create this virtual roundtable discussion about perceptions, memories, ideas, or future discussions about the Peace Walls. And what I also want to do was provide this neutral platform. So I removed anyone's name and who they identify with, because what was more important is highlighting what people were saying. And what you'll find familiar is that either side were saying similar things. Either they were blaming one another for the exact same thing, or they both wanted resolution. But because of this divide, it was very difficult for people to begin discussing that. As well, ambisonics allowed me to transport this large physical area into a new virtual space. So as I mentioned, 2 kilometers long, and reducing that to a room size. And as well, I can transport this into different formats for binaural listening, for example. For the Peace Wall Belfast Soundwalks, what I did was a little bit of an unstructured mapping. So I have 6 different pieces that are 3 points on either side of the wall. And now this combines natural and perceptual sound environments to create some pieces that highlight abstract sounds, so from the sonification, or sound markers or characteristics of these spaces, as well as different sonic events that happen throughout the year of my research. For example, in July, there's something in Northern Ireland called Orange Day, and one of these bonfires is actually right against the Peace Wall in West Belfast. So you'll hear some of the firecrackers or the fire burning or bottles being thrown. As well, you also hear a different piece where residents or local children use the Peace Wall as their playground. And I mean this by either throwing things against it, throwing things above it, or jumping on these generators and fencing because this is part of their daily life. One of the more interesting pieces that I found was that I was able to record on one day. I heard a drummer on the other side of the wall, so I recorded on Bombay Street. I then decided, well, maybe I'll take my chances, grab my gear, and run across the wall to see if they're going to still be playing that drum sound, which I did. I took everything, ran around, was able to record on the other side the exact same drummer playing his piece. So it's the first time that you can actually hear the perception of a sound on either side of the wall. Yes, there's a delay in timing, but it's the same type of sound that was being played. Some of the results from this research, well, after the demonstrations, most of the participants who came were locals or who lived through the Troubles. There were some foreign researchers from Queens, but from the perception of the locals, they were able to discuss with me how they found a new relationship through sound to kind of take a step back and listen to the actual events and be able to open up their minds of what people were saying on either side. It also acted as a sense of historical preservation because 4 days prior to my demonstration, I actually took photos of the space to showcase where exactly I was sticking in microphones, where I was recording. And because I didn't know that there were going to be changes to the Peace Wall when I went to demonstrate the Soundwalk, they actually stripped most of the murals. They started filling in most of the gaps that were in the wall. So it's something that I wasn't aware of, but I knew that communities decide every year or something like that to update the wall. And for some future studies for this type of research, I'm perhaps looking into more immersive technologies such as augmented reality or virtual reality. I really want to bring this transportability of on-site and off-site experiences, not only to the Peace Wall, but to other cultural heritage sites across Northern Ireland. I'd like to thank you very much.